The moment a powerful white stallion sees the farmer's daughter, he goes wild, bucking, rearing, and refusing to calm down. No one can explain his reaction, but the truth is hidden in his scarred past. As the family searches for answers, they uncover a shocking connection between the stallion and the daughter's late mother. The discovery leaves the owner in tears and changes everything they thought they knew. Why does this horse react so strongly to her? What memories are buried deep in his past? And can they unlock the truth to save both the horse and their family? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning sun painted the Walker Ranch in hues of gold and pink. A cool breeze rustled through the tall grass as Henry Walker carefully guided a magnificent white stallion down the metal ramp of a horse trailer. His weathered hands held the lead rope firmly but gently. Shadow's hooves clicked against the metal, each step measured and careful. In the soft morning light, his coat gleamed like fresh snow. Despite the long scar running down his left eye, he was stunning, tall and muscular, with a proud arch to his neck. Henry couldn't help but smile, though worry lines creased his forehead. "Easy now, boy," he murmured as Shadow's ears flicked back and forth, taking in the new surroundings. The ranch's wooden sign creaked slightly in the breeze, its carved letters reading Walker Ranch in faded paint. A few ranch hands gathered at a safe distance, their faces showing both admiration and caution. Henry led Shadow in a small circle, letting him get used to the ground beneath his hooves. The stallion seemed calm enough, though his muscles rippled with contained energy. The crunch of tires on gravel broke the morning quiet. Isabel Navarro's old pickup truck wound its way up the dirt road, dust billowing behind it. As it came to a stop, Henry's heart squeezed in his chest. Through the passenger window, he caught a glimpse of his daughter Lily's face, the first time he'd seen her since she'd left for boarding school months ago. The moment Lily stepped out of the truck, everything changed. Shadow's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring. A high-pitched scream of terror ripped from his throat, echoing across the ranch. The stallion reared suddenly, his front hooves slicing through the air. "Watch out!" Henry shouted, struggling to hold on to the lead rope as Shadow jerked violently backward. Ranch hands scattered like leaves in the wind. Isabel rushed forward but stopped short as Shadow's hooves came dangerously close. Lily stumbled backward, her face pale with shock. She scrambled behind the nearest fence, her hands gripping the wooden rails. "Dad!" she called out, her voice trembling. Henry's boots dug into the dirt as he fought to control the panicking horse. Shadow's eyes rolled white with fear, his powerful body twisting and bucking. "Isabel, get the gate!" he yelled, managing to turn Shadow toward the makeshift paddock they'd prepared. Isabel moved with swift efficiency, throwing the gate open wide. Her calm presence seemed to steady everyone but Shadow, who continued to fight against the lead rope with desperate strength. With careful maneuvering, Henry guided the frenzied stallion into the paddock. Shadow's sides heaved with exertion, his white coat now dark with sweat. As Henry quickly slipped through the gate, Isabel secured it behind him. In the sudden quiet that followed, Lily slowly emerged from behind the fence. Her eyes met Shadow's for a brief moment, dark brown meeting wild, frightened blue. The stallion's gaze held such raw fear and aggression that Lily took an involuntary step backward. The connection broke as Shadow turned away, pacing the paddock's perimeter with agitated steps. Henry watched his daughter, seeing how she hugged herself tightly, her face a mirror of confusion and hurt. He wanted to go to her, to offer comfort, but his hands were still shaking from the struggle with Shadow. Instead, he stood frozen between his daughter and the horse, feeling the weight of both their fears pressing down on him. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the Walker Ranch house, casting warm patches across the worn wooden table. Lily sat hunched over her tea, her fingers wrapped tightly around the ceramic mug as if seeking comfort from its warmth. The earlier incident with Shadow had left her rattled, and the tea in her cup rippled with her slight trembling. Henry leaned against the kitchen counter, his weathered face etched with concern. "Shadow's just skittish, sweetheart. New place, new people. It's a lot for any horse to handle." Lily traced the rim of her mug with her finger. "Dad, that wasn't just being skittish. He looked—" She paused, searching for the right words. "He looked terrified. And angry." "Some horses take time to adjust," Henry said, but his voice carried a hint of uncertainty. "Your mother always said—" He stopped abruptly, the mention of Emily hanging heavy in the air between them. Lily looked up, her eyes searching her father's face. "What did Mom say?" Henry cleared his throat. "She believed every horse had a story. We just need to be patient enough to learn it." Outside, the morning air carried a crisp bite as Henry and Isabel made their way to the round pen where Shadow paced restlessly. His hooves kicked up small clouds of dust with each step, his muscles tense beneath his gleaming black coat. Henry pulled a sugar cube from his pocket, holding it out as he approached the fence. "Easy there, boy," he murmured. Shadow's ears flicked forward for a moment, then pinned back. The stallion snorted, backing away from Henry's outstretched hand. Isabel moved closer, her experienced eyes studying the horse's movements. "Henry," she said softly, "come look at this." She pointed toward Shadow's face as he turned. "There, under his forelock." Henry squinted, then saw what Isabel had noticed, a jagged scar running close to Shadow's left eye, partially hidden by his dark forelock. "Must be an old injury," he muttered, his jaw tightening. "Explains some things." From a safe distance, Lily stood watching, her arms wrapped around herself against the morning chill. Something about Shadow's distress pulled at her heart despite her fear. Taking a deep breath, she called out softly, "Shadow?" The effect was immediate. The stallion's head snapped up, his body going rigid. His nostrils flared as he wheeled toward the sound of her voice, muscles bunching as he charged toward the fence. The powerful impact of his hooves against the ground made Lily stumble backward, her heart hammering in her chest. "Lily, stay back!" Henry shouted, moving protectively toward his daughter. Isabel grabbed Shadow's lead rope, speaking firmly but calmly to the agitated horse. But Shadow's eyes remained fixed on Lily, wild with an emotion that seemed deeper than simple fear or aggression. Lily couldn't move, transfixed by the intensity of Shadow's reaction. Something about her presence sparked this fury in him, but she couldn't understand why. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "What happened to you?" In the dimness of the old barn, Henry sat at his weathered desk, shuffling through Shadow's paperwork. The afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. His fingers traced over the sparse details on the forms, frowning at the obvious gaps in information. "This can't be right," he muttered, squinting at the previous owner section. Where there should have been names and dates, he found only vague references and partial addresses. The registration papers looked legitimate enough, but the history was mysteriously incomplete. A knot formed in his stomach as he remembered Emily's words about knowing a horse's background. "Always know where they've been," she used to say, "because it tells you where they can go." Henry rubbed his temples, the weight of his decision to buy Shadow pressing down on him. Outside, Lily stood at the paddock fence, her hands trembling slightly as she balanced a shiny red apple on the top rail. Shadow paced at the far end, his black coat gleaming despite the overcast sky. His ears flicked back and forth, nostrils flaring as he caught the apple's sweet scent. "It's okay," Lily whispered, taking a small step backward. "You can take your time." Shadow's hooves kicked up dust as he moved, his movements tense and jerky. He approached the fence, then retreated, then approached again. Each time he came closer, but his eyes remained wide and suspicious.
Lily held her breath as Shadow finally stretched his neck toward the apple. His nostrils flared wider, testing the air. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest. Then Shadow's muscles tensed, and he snorted loudly, backing away with quick, agitated steps. The apple sat untouched on the fence. "At least he didn't run away this time," Lily said softly to herself, trying to find some positive sign in the interaction. But her shoulders slumped as she watched Shadow return to his nervous pacing. Inside the barn, Henry picked up the phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. As he waited for an answer, his eyes drifted to the window, where he could see Shadow's pen and the gathering storm clouds beyond. "Jack, it's Henry Walker," he said when the call connected. He listened intently, his free hand drumming anxiously on the desk. "Yeah, about that stallion I mentioned. No, he's not settling in well at all." He paused, listening, "especially around my daughter. It's like he's seen a ghost when she's near." Thunder rumbled in the distance as Henry jotted down notes from his conversation. "More time, you think?" Another pause. "Just keep things calm and consistent." The advice seemed too simple for such a complex problem, but Henry knew Jack had years of experience with troubled horses. As he hung up the phone, Henry walked to the barn door. Shadow's pen stood out starkly against the darkening sky. The stallion had cost him nearly everything he had left, a gamble he'd taken hoping to turn the ranch's fortune around. Now, watching the horse's agitated movements, Henry felt the cold grip of doubt squeeze his chest. Had he just made the biggest mistake of his life? The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the tin roof of the barn. Henry stood in the doorway, his worry deepening with each flash of lightning that illuminated Shadow's restless form. The evening rain drummed steadily against Lily's bedroom window, creating a lonely melody that matched her mood. She lay on her bed, holding a silver-framed photograph close to her chest. In the image, her mother Emily smiled brilliantly while sitting atop her favorite horse, her long brown hair catching the sunlight. Lily traced her mother's face with her finger, feeling the cool glass beneath her touch. "I miss you so much, Mom," she whispered, her voice catching. The photograph had been taken just months before the accident, when everything at Walker Ranch still felt whole and right. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Lily's thoughts drifted to Shadow, alone in the barn. She wondered if he was afraid of storms, like her old pony had been. A tear slid down her cheek as she remembered how her mother used to calm frightened horses during thunderstorms, singing softly to them in their stalls. Meanwhile, in the barn's tack room, Henry sat heavily on an old wooden chair, the leather smell of saddles and bridles surrounding him. Isabel stood nearby, organizing riding equipment as she listened to her old friend's troubles. "I see Emily in her eyes, Isabel," Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every time I look at Lily, I'm reminded of what we lost." He ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "And now, watching her with Shadow today, I'm terrified of losing her too." Isabel set down the bridle she was cleaning and turned to face him. "Henry Walker, that girl needs her father right now, not just someone who worries from a distance." Her tone was gentle but firm. "Emily always said Lily had a gift with horses, just like her." "That's what scares me," Henry admitted, staring at his calloused hands. "I wasn't there when Emily needed me most. I was too busy with the ranch, always thinking there'd be more time. Now Lily's back, and I don't know how to bridge this gap between us." "Then start by trusting her," Isabel said, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. "Emily would want that." Outside the barn door, partially hidden by shadows and rain, Joseph Miller pressed closer to hear their conversation. His clothes were soaked, but he didn't seem to notice. His face twisted with barely contained bitterness as he listened to Henry and Isabel talk. "Big shot Henry Walker," Joseph muttered under his breath. "Throwing money around on dangerous horses while the rest of us struggle." His eyes darted to Shadow's stall, where the black stallion paced restlessly in the storm. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating Joseph's face for a brief moment. His features were tight with resentment, jaw clenched as he watched through the crack in the door. Thunder followed quickly, masking the sound of his boots in the mud as he shifted position. "Fool's errand," he whispered harshly, "thinking you can save this ranch with one fancy horse." His fingers curled into fists at his sides as Henry's voice carried through the door, discussing future plans for Shadow. The storm's intensity increased, rain now falling in heavy sheets. Joseph stood there, getting drenched, his jealousy and anger seeming to grow with each flash of lightning that lit up the night sky. The early morning sun hadn't yet cleared the mountains when Lily crept down the hallway of the ranch house. She'd meant to get a glass of water, but voices from the kitchen made her pause. "That scar near his eye," Henry was saying in a low voice. "I can't figure out how he got it." "It's old," Isabel replied. "The way the hair's grown back, all white around it, must be from years ago." Lily pressed herself against the wall, listening intently. Her heart skipped a beat as a memory surfaced. Her mother telling stories about healing injured horses, especially one that had been hurt near its eye. "I've never seen a horse react so strongly to someone," Henry continued, "especially to Lily." The mention of her name made Lily's chest tighten. She waited until their voices moved toward the back door before slipping away. Her mind was racing with half-formed thoughts and memories. The storage loft above the old barn had always been her mother's special place. Lily climbed the wooden ladder carefully, dust motes dancing in the early morning light that streamed through the small window. The familiar smell of hay and aged wood brought tears to her eyes. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, each filled with pieces of the past. Lily's hands trembled as she opened the first one, marked ranch records in her mother's neat handwriting. Training logs, competition entries, and old veterinary bills spilled onto her lap. She moved to another box, this one full of photographs. Her fingers sorted through image after image. Her mother at various horse shows, training sessions, quiet moments with beloved animals. Then she found it. The photograph was slightly faded, its edges worn soft, but the image was clear. Emily Walker stood in the morning sun, her auburn hair catching the light. Her arms were wrapped around the neck of a magnificent white stallion. The horse's coat gleamed like fresh snow, and there, near his left eye, was a distinctive mark, a small scar with white hair growing around it. Lily's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the photo. She stared at the image, taking in every detail. The gentle way her mother held the horse, the trust evident in the stallion's relaxed posture. This was Shadow, younger, unscarred by whatever had happened in the years since, but unmistakably the same horse. She scrambled down the ladder and ran toward the house, the photograph clutched carefully in her hands. Henry was in the kitchen with his morning coffee when she burst in. "Dad," she gasped, holding out the photo. "Look." Henry took the photograph, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. His face drained of color as he stared at the image of his late wife and the horse that now paced their paddock. His hands weren't quite steady as he set his cup down. "That's," he started, then had to clear his throat. "That's Shadow." "He was Mom's," Lily whispered. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. They both looked out the kitchen window toward the paddock where Shadow stood in the early morning light, his white coat glowing like a ghost from the past. The evening sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Lily stood before Shadow's pen, her fingers trembling slightly as they held the weathered photograph. The image of her mother with an identical white stallion gave her a surge of courage she hadn't felt before. Shadow paced restlessly inside the enclosure, his hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. "Shadow!" Lily called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She took a careful step forward, then another. The stallion's head snapped up, his ears pinning back against his skull. Without warning, he charged toward her, muscles bunching beneath his gleaming coat. Lily's heart hammered in her chest, but something deep inside her took over. She raised her hand, palm facing outward, just as she'd seen her mother do in countless riding lessons years ago. "Stop!" The word escaped her lips with surprising authority. Shadow's hooves skidded in the dirt as he halted mid-charge, his eyes wide with surprise. The stallion stood frozen, nostrils flaring, just a few feet from the fence. His reaction seemed to surprise him as much as it did Lily. Henry burst from the barn, his boots pounding against the packed earth. "Lily!" he shouted, fear evident in his voice. But he pulled up short when he saw the scene before him, his daughter standing tall, hand raised, and Shadow stock still, watching her with newfound attention. Lily didn't take her eyes off Shadow as she moved closer to the fence, her movements slow and deliberate. The scar near his eye was clearer now, a jagged line partially hidden by his forelock. Her mother's words came back to her, floating up from memories she thought she'd lost. "Easy now, beautiful boy," she murmured, using the gentle tone Emily had always used with nervous horses. "That's right. You're safe here." Shadow's ears swiveled back and forth, catching each word. His stance remained tense, but the wild look in his eyes began to soften. Isabel appeared beside Henry, both of them watching in amazed silence as Lily continued her quiet litany of soothing words. "You knew my mother, didn't you?" Lily's voice cracked slightly. "She helped you once, just like she helped all the others." With painstaking slowness, Lily reached out to touch the fence. Shadow snorted but held his ground, his tail swishing nervously. For the first time since his arrival, he didn't rear or charge when someone approached. Instead, he stood watching Lily with what almost looked like recognition in his dark eyes. Isabel grabbed Henry's arm, squeezing it tight. "Look at that," she whispered. "Just like Emily." Henry nodded, unable to speak as he watched his daughter connect with the horse that had seemed beyond reaching. The evening light caught Shadow's white coat, making him glow like a ghost from the past, while Lily's gentle voice carried on the breeze, breaking through years of the stallion's built-up anger and fear. In that moment, something shifted between girl and horse. A tiny spark of trust, fragile as a spider's web, but just as real. Shadow took a small step closer to the fence, his ears now pricked forward, listening intently to Lily's voice. The morning sun painted the ranch in soft golden hues as Lily stepped out of the house, her boots crunching on the gravel path. She carried nothing but determination as she made her way to Shadow's pen. The white stallion watched her approach, his ears twitching with nervous energy. Taking a deep breath, Lily began walking in a slow circle outside the pen. She kept her movements fluid and predictable, remembering how her mother used to say that horses needed to learn trust through consistency. Shadow's eyes followed her, but his usual aggressive stance had softened slightly. "That's it," Lily whispered, maintaining her steady pace. "Just you and me, getting to know each other." She continued her circular path, each round bringing a subtle change in Shadow's demeanor. His tail, which usually lashed in agitation, now swished gently. Inside the ranch office, Henry sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of bills and bank statements. The numbers refused to add up the way he needed them to. He rubbed his temples, trying to ward off a headache. Isabel knocked softly on the doorframe before entering with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You look like you could use this," she said, setting 1 cup beside him. "Thanks, Isabel." Henry gestured at the paperwork spread across his desk. "Ever since Emily," his voice caught, "the ranch hasn't been the same. Feed costs are up, and now with Shadow—" He shook his head. Isabel pulled up a chair. "Henry, look out there." She pointed through the window where Lily continued her patient work with Shadow. "That horse might be more valuable than you think. Your daughter hasn't shown this much interest in anything since she came home." Before Henry could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approached. Joseph Miller rode up to the fence line on his glossy quarter horse, his usual smirk firmly in place. He tipped his hat mockingly. "Well, well," Joseph called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's quite a fine horse you've got there, Henry. Though I wonder if you'll ever get your money's worth out of him." His eyes narrowed as he watched Lily and Shadow. "Some horses just can't be tamed. Shame to waste good money on lost causes." Henry's jaw clenched tight, his knuckles whitening around his coffee cup. Through the window, he could see Lily pause in her exercises, Shadow immediately tensing at the interruption. The fragile trust they'd been building seemed to waver in the morning air. "Some people might say the same about bitter old men, Joseph," Isabel said quietly, but with steel in her voice. "Yet here we are, still trying." Joseph's smile turned cold. He sat straighter in his saddle, looking down at the ranch buildings with barely concealed contempt. "Just trying to be neighborly, sharing my concerns. That's all." He turned his horse away, but not before adding, "Hope that beast doesn't hurt anyone before you come to your senses." Henry watched him ride off, worry etching deeper lines around his eyes. In the pen, Lily had resumed her careful circles, but Shadow's ears now flicked nervously back and forth, his earlier calm disturbed by Joseph's presence. The attic's floorboards creaked under Lily's careful steps as late afternoon sunlight filtered through the dusty window. She traced her fingers along the wooden beams, searching for more clues about her mother's past. Her eyes caught sight of something tucked away in a shadowy corner, a sturdy wooden chest with brass fittings, its surface dulled by years of neglect. Lily's heart quickened. She knelt beside it, brushing away cobwebs and dust. The lock was old but still held firm. After a moment's thought, she remembered the small key she'd found earlier among her mother's things. With trembling hands, she retrieved it from her pocket. The key slid in perfectly. With a satisfying click, the chest opened. Inside, carefully bundled with faded ribbon, lay several letters. The paper had yellowed with age, but her mother's elegant handwriting remained clear and strong. Lily lifted them out reverently, settling cross-legged on the wooden floor as golden light streamed through the window. "My dearest Shadow," she read aloud, her voice catching. "Today we made incredible progress. You've taught me so much about patience and trust. It's not about forcing our will upon these magnificent creatures. It's about building a partnership based on mutual understanding." Lily's fingers traced the words as she continued reading. "The key is in the voice," another letter revealed. "Horses respond to our energy, our tone. When we approach them with genuine love and empathy, they sense it. No harsh bits or spurs needed, just gentle guidance and unwavering faith in their intelligence." As she read on, tears welled in her eyes. Her mother detailed how she'd developed her special training methods, combining soft voice commands with complete emotional openness. But then came the heartbreaking entry. My beloved Shadow, I must let you go. The ranch is struggling and we need the funds. My heart breaks, but I pray someday you'll find someone who understands you as I do. Lily clutched the letters to her chest, her mother's words resonating deep within her soul. Rising slowly, she moved to the attic window. Below, she could see Shadow pacing in his paddock, his white coat gleaming in the late afternoon sun. The scar near his eye was visible even from this distance, a reminder of the hardships he'd endured after leaving her mother's care. A profound sense of purpose settled over her as she watched him. These weren't just training instructions, they were her mother's legacy, a gift across time. Every word in those letters held the key to reaching Shadow's wounded heart. Her mother had shown the way: patience, understanding, and unconditional love. Lily carefully gathered the letters, knowing she held both instructions and inspiration in her hands. Her mother's gentle methods would guide her in healing Shadow's broken trust. In doing so, perhaps she could also heal the void left by her mother's passing. Looking down at Shadow once more, Lily felt a deep connection to both her mother's memory and the magnificent horse below. She would honor her mother's wisdom by helping Shadow find his way back to trust and joy. The first hints of dawn painted the sky in soft purple hues as Lily made her way to the stable. Her boots crunched softly on the gravel path while clutching her mother's letters close to her chest. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the familiar scents of hay and horses that always reminded her of home. Shadow's white coat seemed to glow in the dim light of early morning. As Lily approached his pen, the stallion's ears pricked forward, then back, uncertain. She stopped at a safe distance, remembering her mother's words about patience and respect. "Good morning, beautiful boy," she said softly, using the gentle tone Emily had described in her letters. She began humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing, letting the melody drift across the space between them. Shadow's tail swished, but he didn't rear or charge. Instead, he watched her with those deep, dark eyes that held so much pain and fear. Lily opened one of the letters, reading aloud in a clear, calm voice. "Trust comes in whispers," she read, "like morning dew on grass. Let them come to you in their own time, on their own terms." She settled onto a hay bale near the fence, continuing to read passages about earning a horse's confidence through consistency and kindness. Shadow's nervous pacing slowly settled as her voice filled the quiet morning air. Isabel's approach was so quiet that Lily didn't notice her until she spoke. "You're up early," she said warmly, keeping her voice low to avoid startling Shadow. Lily smiled, showing Isabel the letters. Mom wrote about how she would sit with nervous horses, just talking and being present. She said sometimes the biggest breakthrough comes from doing nothing at all. Isabel nodded, studying Shadow's calmer demeanor. "Your mother was wise about horses, and people too." She paused, watching Shadow take a cautious step closer to where Lily sat. "You know, there's a small show coming up at the Miller Creek Arena. Nothing fancy, but it might be a good starting point if you're thinking about the bigger competition." Lily's eyes lit up. "Do you really think we could be ready? With your mother's methods and your dedication?" Isabel smiled. "I wouldn't bet against it." Unknown to them, Joseph Miller crouched behind a stack of hay bales, his face twisted with contempt. He waited until both women were absorbed in their conversation before slipping around to the back of Shadow's pen. With quick, practiced movements, he worked at the bottom of a fence board, loosening it just enough to create weakness without being obvious. His lips curled into a cruel smile as he imagined the chaos that would ensue when the board gave way at the right moment. Let them try to enter a show with an escaped wild stallion, he thought. That would teach Henry Walker to think he could succeed where Joseph had failed. Back at the pen's front, Lily continued reading her mother's words aloud, unaware of the sabotage taking place behind her. Shadow had moved closer still, drawn by her steady presence and gentle voice. The morning sun now painted the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, promising a new day of possibilities. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Henry inspected the loose board on Shadow's paddock fence. His weathered hands traced the splintered wood, brow furrowed with concern. The nails had worked themselves free, leaving dangerous gaps that could harm any horse, let alone one as unpredictable as Shadow. "I should have checked these fences weeks ago," Henry muttered, shaking his head. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. Lily appeared beside him, her boots scuffing in the dirt. "Dad, it's not your fault. We can fix it together." "Honey, this could have been dangerous," Henry said, his voice tight with worry. "Shadow could have gotten hurt, or worse." "Then let's reinforce all the fencing," Lily suggested, her eyes bright with determination. "I can help after training sessions with Shadow." Henry tensed at the mention of training. Lily's devotion to the Stallion mirrored Emily's, filling him with dread. Later that evening, the tension finally broke over dinner. The only sounds were forks scraping against plates until Henry set his utensils down with deliberate care. "Lily, this obsession with Shadow has to stop," he said firmly. "You're spending every waking moment with that horse." Lily's fork clattered against her plate. "It's not an obsession, Dad. I'm making progress with him." "Remember what happened to your mother." Henry's voice rose sharply, fear making it harsh. "One mistake with a troubled horse is all it takes." Isabel, who had been quietly eating her meal, placed her hand on Henry's arm, but he shrugged it off. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. "You never understood," she said, her voice breaking. "You never understood how much I needed to grieve her too. Shadow is my only connection to Mom, and you want to take that away from me too?" "Lily, that's not what I—" Henry started, but Lily pushed away from the table. "You sent me to boarding school when she died," Lily said through tears. "Now I'm close to her through Shadow, and you can't stand it." Before Henry could respond, Lily ran from the dining room. The screen door slammed behind her as she fled to the barn. Henry slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. Isabel moved closer, her presence steady and calming. "I'm losing her, Isabel," Henry whispered. "Just like I lost Emily?" "No," Isabel said gently. "You're pushing her away because you're scared. But that fear is what's really coming between you." Outside in the barn, Lily sat on a hay bale near Shadow's stall. The stallion's soft breathing was the only sound besides her quiet sobs. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Shadow as he moved to the stall door. "Sorry he doesn't understand. Mom would have." Her voice broke on the last word, tears falling. Shadow's soft nicker seemed to answer her pain, easing her loneliness for a moment. The morning sun cast shadows at Walker Ranch as Henry paced his office, studying mounting bills. The feed-in voice made his stomach clench. He gazed at Shadow's paddock, where the white stallion stood alert. "Time to cut losses," Henry muttered, reaching for the phone to call the horse trader. Isabel appeared in the doorway, noting the papers and his troubled look. "You're selling him?" she asked, entering. Henry set down the phone. "Can't afford a dangerous horse. The feed bills—" "Have you seen Lily with him? She talks to him for hours. He took an apple from her yesterday." "That's what scares me." Henry's voice cracked. "If he hurts her—" Emily's accident loomed between them. "Shadow's different now," Isabel said. "They're healing each other." Henry slumped. "The risk exists in everything we love," she finished. but giving up too soon is riskier. At dinner, tension filled the air. Lily pushed her food around. "You're too close to that horse," Henry snapped. "Remember your mother." Lily's fork clattered. "How dare you use Mom against me? I'm protecting you. You're controlling me. Shadow's my only link to Mom." Crying, she continued, "You abandoned me after she died. Sent me to boarding school, buried yourself in work. Now you'll ruin the one thing that connects me to her." She fled, screen door slamming. Isabel touched Henry's arm. "She's hurting, like you." Henry watched Lily run to the barn, where Shadow glowed in the dusk. "I'm pushing her away," he whispered. In the barn, Lily collapsed by Shadow's stall, sobbing. The stallion lowered his head to her. "I'm sorry," she whispered to horse and mother alike. The fairgrounds bustled as vehicles filled the dusty lot. Lily steadied her shaking hands on Shadow's lead rope. The white stallion twitched, ears rotating at new stimuli. She murmured soothingly, using her practiced tone. Shadow stayed close as they approached the practice ring. Henry watched from the fence, arms crossed, face worried, but attentive. Spectators gathered around him, whispering. In the ring, Lily led Shadow through warm-ups. His hesitant steps became fluid under her steady commands, guided by her mother's written advice. Shadow cleared their first jump clumsily, clipping the pole. Onlookers nodded approval. Isabel watched, offering encouragement. Joseph Miller sneered, muttering, "Amateur hour." As they approached the second jump, Henry gripped his arms tighter. Pride and fear mixed as his daughter's resemblance to Emily struck him. Shadow improved with each jump. Though rough, the pair showed promise that caught the crowd's attention. After practice, Lily led Shadow out through the arena gate, his hooves crunching softly on the gravel. Despite not placing in today's event, several judges had noticed their potential, whispering and making notes. While cooling down her horse with slow, methodical walks, she overheard excited talk of the upcoming regional competition from a cluster of riders near the water trough. "Everyone who's anyone will be there," a girl in a pristine show jacket declared. "It's the biggest event of the season." Looking into Shadow's calm, trusting eyes, now free of the wild fear that had haunted them weeks ago, Lily stroked his damp neck and resolved to train harder for regionals. She would honor her mother's memory, not just by competing, but by showing the world what Shadow could become with patience and love. The moon cast long shadows across the ranch as Joseph Miller's truck rolled silently down the gravel road, headlights off. He parked behind the barn, away from the main house's view. His boots made soft crunching sounds on the gravel as he moved, with practiced stealth toward the feed room. Joseph's hand trembled slightly as he pulled out a small vial from his jacket pocket. The glass felt cold against his fingers. Inside was a powder he'd carefully measured, just enough to make Shadow sick, but not enough to raise serious alarm. His face twisted into a bitter smile as he worked the door's simple latch. The feed room smelled of sweet grain and hay. Joseph's eyes adjusted to the darkness, picking out the familiar shapes of feed bags and storage bins. He knew exactly where Shadow's special grain mix was kept. He'd watched Isabel prepare it earlier that day. The bin sat apart from the others, marked with Shadow's name in Isabel's neat handwriting. "Think you're so special, don't you?" Joseph muttered under his breath as he carefully opened the bin. "Henry Walker's miracle horse." His words dripped with contempt as he unscrewed the vial's cap. Working quickly but methodically, Joseph mixed the powder into the top layer of grain. He made sure to distribute it evenly, stirring with a nearby scoop. The powder dissolved almost instantly, leaving no trace. Anyone checking the feed would see nothing unusual. A board creaked somewhere in the barn. Joseph froze, his heart pounding. After a long moment of silence, He heard only the distant sound of crickets and the occasional soft nickering of horses in their stalls. Still, he worked faster now, smoothing the grained surface to hide any sign of tampering. Joseph's hands were steady as he replaced the bin's lid, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. He double-checked that everything looked exactly as he'd found it. Years of working around horses had taught him to be thorough. No one could suspect anything was amiss. As he slipped back outside, Joseph paused to look toward Shadow's paddock. The white stallion was a ghostly figure in the moonlight, peaceful now, but soon to be brought low by Joseph's careful planning. "Let's see how special you are when you can't even make it through basic training," he whispered. The sound of a door closing at the main house made Joseph duck into the shadows. He waited, barely breathing, until he was sure no one was coming to investigate. Then he made his way back to his truck, each step calculated to avoid making noise. Starting his truck far down the road, Joseph allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. By morning, Shadow would begin feeling the effects, and all his progress with Lily would start to unravel. It was perfect, untraceable, and seemingly natural. Just a horse losing his edge, nothing more. As Joseph drove away, the ranch grew quiet again. Shadow stood in his paddock, unaware of what awaited him in tomorrow's feed. While inside the main house, Lily slept peacefully. Her mother's training notes spread across her bedside table. The moon continued its arc across the sky, casting those same long shadows that had hidden Joseph's sabotage, while crickets chirped their nighttime chorus, oblivious to the trouble brewing at Walker Ranch. The early morning mist clung to the ground as Lily sat cross-legged in her bedroom, carefully unfolding the last of her mother's letters. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed out the delicate paper. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through her window, casting a warm glow on the weathered pages. "My dearest Shadow," Lily read aloud, recognizing her mother's flowing handwriting. "When fear grips you, remember our special moment, the gentle touch behind your ear, the soft melody we shared. Your trust was earned through patience and love." Lily's heart quickened as she continued reading. Emily had detailed a specific technique, one that involved humming a gentle tune while touching a sensitive spot behind the horse's ear. It was a method born of trust and understanding, not force or dominance. Without wasting another moment, Lily pulled on her boots and hurried to the barn. The morning air was crisp, and dew dampened her jeans as she made her way to Shadow's pen. The white stallion stood alert, his ears pricked forward at her approach. "Hey there, beautiful boy," Lily whispered, keeping her voice steady and soft. Shadow's nostrils flared, but he didn't back away as he usually did. Taking this as a good sign, Lily began to hum, a simple, sweet melody her mother used to sing around the barn. Shadow's ears swiveled toward the sound. His muscles, though tense, didn't bunch for flight. Lily continued humming, letting the tune float between them like a gentle bridge. Slowly, she raised her hand to the fence. Isabel appeared silently at the corner of the barn, watching with held breath as Lily opened the gate and stepped inside. The morning light caught Shadow's white coat, making him glow like a ghost in the misty air. Still humming, Lily inched closer. Shadow remained still, his dark eyes fixed on her. When she was within arm's reach, she carefully extended her hand toward his head. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Then, miraculously, Shadow lowered his head slightly. Lily's fingers found the spot behind his ear, and she felt the warmth of his skin beneath his silky mane. A shudder ran through the horse's body, but he didn't pull away. "That's it," Lily whispered between verses of her song. "Just like Mom showed you." Shadow's breathing deepened and his eyelids drooped slightly. The tension in his powerful shoulders began to ease. Lily continued the gentle touch, her mother's words coming to life through her fingers. From her spot by the barn, Isabel wiped a tear from her cheek. She watched as Lily worked with Shadow, seeing Emily's spirit alive in every careful movement her daughter made. The connection between girl and horse was almost visible in the morning light, a delicate thread of trust beginning to strengthen. Shadow's head dipped lower, his breath warm against Lily's arm. His eyes, once wild with fear, now held a glimmer of recognition. Something in him remembered this touch, this song, this feeling of safety. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Lily maintained her gentle contact, her voice never faltering as she hummed her mother's melody. Shadow's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. His entire demeanor softened, his energy shifting from defensive to receptive. Neither Lily nor Isabel noticed Joseph Miller's truck pulling up to the far pasture, or the dark look that crossed his face as he watched the scene unfold. His fingers gripped his steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with frustration, as he observed Shadow's positive response to Lily's touch. The morning sun cast long shadows across the paddock as Henry leaned against the weathered fence post. His weathered hands gripped the rough wood, knuckles white with tension. But as he watched Lily work with Shadow, that tension slowly began to ease. Shadow moved in perfect sync with Lily's gentle commands. The stallion's ears flicked forward, attentive to her every word. When she raised her hand, he stopped. When she clicked her tongue softly, he trotted. It was like watching a dance, one built on trust rather than force. "Just like Emily," Henry whispered, his voice catching. He blinked rapidly, surprised by the tears that threatened to fall. The way Lily stood, the patient tilt of her head, even the soft murmur of her voice, it was all so familiar it made his chest ache. Isabel had been right all along. This wasn't just about training a horse. This was about healing, about connecting with something deeper. Henry watched as Lily praised Shadow with a gentle pat, the horse lowering his head to nuzzle her shoulder. The scar near Shadow's eye seemed less prominent now, softened by trust. Taking a deep breath, Henry pushed away from the fence and walked toward them. Lily looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Dad?" "I've been watching," he said softly. You're doing amazing work with him." He gestured to Shadow, who regarded him calmly. "Those letters you found, Emily's letters. Would you mind sharing some of them with me?" Lily's eyes widened. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I carry this one with me," she admitted. "Mom wrote about how horses carry our pain sometimes, just like we carry theirs. She said healing happens when we learn to trust each other again." Henry's throat tightened as Lily read a few lines. Emily's words, even on paper, carried that same gentle wisdom he'd fallen in love with years ago. She always did know how to see right to the heart of things, he managed. "I miss her so much, Dad," Lily whispered. Henry stepped closer, placing a careful hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Me too, sweetheart, me too." They stood there for a moment, Shadow's quiet breathing the only sound. Finally, Henry squeezed Lily's shoulder. "How about some breakfast? You can tell me more about what your mother wrote." Lily nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. As they walked toward the house together, the morning sun warm on their backs, Henry felt something shift between them. Like a door long closed was finally creaking open. Behind the barn, hidden in the shadows, Joseph Miller watched their retreating figures. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, jaw clenching so tight it hurt. The sight of their reconciliation, of Shadow's progress, made his stomach churn with bitter rage. They were running out of time. The competition was approaching fast. His window for sabotage was closing. The week before the prestigious regional competition passed in a blur of activity at Walker Ranch. Early morning light filtered through the barn's dusty windows as Lily and Isabel methodically packed the horse trailer. Their movements were careful and precise. Each item checked off a handwritten list. "Extra lead rope," Isabel called out, her dark hair pulled back in a neat braid. "Got it," Lily replied, holding up the coiled rope. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it in the equipment box. "I can't believe we're really doing this." Isabel squeezed her shoulder. "Your mother would be so proud." In the ranch office, Henry pored over travel arrangements, double-checking routes and weather forecasts. His weathered fingers traced the map spread across his desk, marking potential rest stops for Shadow. The coffee beside him had gone cold, forgotten in his concentration. The atmosphere around the ranch crackled with nervous energy. Shadow seemed to sense it too, prancing in his paddock whenever anyone walked past. His white coat gleamed in the sunlight, recently groomed to perfection. As darkness fell and the ranch grew quiet, a lone figure slipped through the shadows. Joseph Miller's boots made no sound on the packed earth as he approached the tack room. His face, usually masked with false friendliness, now showed naked malice in the moonlight. The lock yielded easily to his practiced touch. Inside, Joseph's fingers found Shadow's competition bridle, hanging on its designated hook. Working quickly, he pulled a small knife from his pocket and carefully weakened the stitching at crucial stress points. His lips curled into a satisfied smirk as he imagined the leather giving way at precisely the wrong moment. But he wasn't finished. Joseph reached into his jacket and removed a small packet. With practiced movements, he lifted Shadow's saddle and carefully worked the irritant powder under the padding. The fine granules would bite into Shadow's skin during the jumps, causing just enough pain to throw off his concentration. "Let's see how well you handle this, little Lily," Joseph whispered into the darkness. He replaced everything exactly as he'd found it, erasing all evidence of his presence. The next morning dawned bright and crisp. Henry backed the truck up to the trailer while Lily and Isabel made final preparations. Shadow loaded easily, surprisingly calm for such a spirited horse. "That's my boy," Lily murmured, running her hand along his neck. The white stallion lowered his head to her touch, their bond evident in the gentle gesture. "We're going to make Mom proud today." Henry watched from the driver's side, his throat tight with emotion. He bowed his head briefly, offering a silent prayer for their safety and success. Isabel closed the trailer door with a solid thunk, checking the latch twice. "Everything's secured," Isabel announced, her steady voice masking her own nervousness. "We're ready to go." No one noticed the slight fraying of the bridle leather, carefully hidden within its folds. The sabotage saddle sat innocently among the other equipment, its deadly secret concealed beneath pristine padding. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as the truck and trailer pulled away, gravel crunching under the tires. Behind them, Joseph Miller watched from behind the barn, a cold smile playing across his face as the Walker Ranch disappeared around the bend. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling competition grounds as Henry guided their truck and trailer through the entrance gates. Massive white tents dotted the perfectly manicured grass, and colorful banners snapped in the crisp breeze. The main arena stood at the center, its pristine white fencing gleaming. Lily's stomach churned with butterflies as she watched dozens of polished horses and riders warming up. These weren't local competitors. These were serious equestrians with expensive tack and years of training. She clutched Emily's letters in her jacket pocket, drawing strength from their presence. "Deep breaths," Isabel reminded her as they unloaded Shadow from the trailer. The white stallion's coat gleamed from their thorough grooming that morning. His ears swiveled,
taking in the unfamiliar sounds and sights. Henry helped carry their equipment, his weathered face tight with concern. "Everything okay, Shadow?" he asked softly, noticing the horse's twitching muscles. Shadow snorted but remained relatively calm as they made their way to their assigned warm-up area. The side ring was less crowded, giving them space to prepare. Isabel helped Lily mount up, checking Shadow's girth one final time. "Remember what Emily wrote. Trust your instincts," she said, squeezing Lily's hand. Lily nodded, gathering the reins. Shadow moved beautifully beneath her as they began their warm-up routine. His strides were powerful and balanced as they circled the ring. When they took a few practice jumps, he cleared them effortlessly. "He looks good," Henry called from the rail, genuine pride in his voice. "Really good, Lily." Other competitors paused to watch Shadow's fluid movement. His white coat practically sparkled in the sunlight, drawing admiring glances. Lily felt a surge of confidence. They belonged here, among the best. The loudspeaker crackled. "Rider number 147, Lily Walker on Shadow. Please proceed to the main arena holding area." Lily's heart jumped into her throat. Isabel helped her make final adjustments, brushing Shadow's coat one last time. Henry stepped forward, placing his hand on Shadow's neck. "Your mother would be so proud," he said softly. "Both of you." Lily blinked back tears as she checked Shadow's bridle and reins one final time, not noticing the compromised stitching near the bit. The leather looked pristine on the surface, gleaming from their careful cleaning. "Next up, number 147, Lily Walker riding Shadow." The announcer's voice boomed across the grounds. Henry gripped the rail, his knuckles white. Isabel stood beside him, both of them watching as Lily gathered her reins and headed toward the main arena entrance. Shadow's hooves kicked up small divots of grass, his stride confident and eager. "Come on, Shadow," Lily whispered. "Let's show them what we can do." The arena hushed as Lily and Shadow entered, footsteps resonating through packed stands. Sunlight pierced high windows, casting shadows on fresh sand. Lily's heart pounded, but she controlled her breath, recalling her mother's teachings. "Easy now, boy," she whispered, running her hand along Shadow's gleaming white neck. The stallion's ears flicked back, catching her voice, then forward again as they approached the first jump. Henry clutched the railing white-knuckled, while Isabel stood supportively beside him. The crowd held its breath as the pair lined up their approach. Shadow's muscles tensed beneath Lily as they neared the jump. Emily's letters had taught her that trust worked both ways. She had to show her confidence. They soared over the first jump to applause. Shadow landed perfectly, and Lily smiled. The next two jumps flowed effortlessly as they found their rhythm. Midway through, Shadow's head jerked unexpectedly, a new behavior. His agitation grew with another violent shake, making the bridle slip oddly in her grip. "Whoa, steady," Lily murmured, trying to maintain their connection. But Shadow's steps became increasingly erratic. She could feel him fighting something, his smooth gait turning choppy and uncertain. In the stands, Isabel leaned forward, her experienced eyes catching the unusual movement. "Something's wrong," she whispered to Henry. Shadow's distress mounted as the bridle strap weakened. Lily's control wavered, approaching the highest jump. His fluid motion turned stiff and resistant. They took off awkwardly. Mid-jump, Shadow twisted, clipping the rail. The rough landing had them stumbling as the saddle shifted, nearly sending them down. Though they recovered, Shadow's confidence was gone. He trembled, sides heaving with panicked breaths. Murmurs filled the arena. Henry rose halfway, face pale, while Isabel covered her mouth. But Lily focused solely on Shadow, struggling to maintain their fragile connection. The bridle snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the arena. Lily's heart leaped as the straps fell against Shadow's neck. Gas rippled through the crowd.
Henry shouted for her to stop, but Lily recalled her mother's lessons about trust and voice commands. "Easy, Shadow," she called steadily, despite trembling hands. The stallion's ears turned back at her voice. The announcer reported the equipment failure, but Lily focused only on Shadow's movements. As they neared the highest jump, his stride grew uneven. His muscles tensed oddly beneath her. "We can do this," she whispered, stroking his neck. "Together, like Mom taught us." Shadow jumped weakly, his legs buckling mid-leap. His hooves hit awkwardly as the crowd screamed. Lily was thrown, rolling across the arena floor. After a moment of silence, chaos erupted. Medical teams rushed in as Lily crawled to Shadow, who lay breathing heavily. Henry and Isabel ran toward them, faces pale. Lily knelt by her horse's head, crying as she felt his racing pulse. From the stands, Joseph Miller watched with satisfaction, before slipping away, pleased his sabotage had ruined Henry Walker's aspirations. The medical team examined Shadow, while Lily whispered comfort. Henry and Isabel watched anxiously as concerned murmurs filled the arena, all eyes on the fallen stallion and his devoted rider. Behind the arena, Shadow lay on fresh straw, his white coat sweaty and breathing labored. Lily knelt beside him, holding his head and crying onto his forelock. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, touching the scar near his eye. Henry stood back, hands in pockets, watching his daughter tend the stallion with Emily's gentleness. The sight moved him deeply. The vet examined Shadow as arena sounds drifted through. Crowds, announcements, and distant horses. "Lily," Isabel approached with an old envelope. "I found this with Emily's letters. You haven't read it." Lily kept one hand on Shadow while taking the yellowed paper. She read aloud Emily's words about the special bond between horse and rider, about love overcoming obstacles and believing in each other through adversity. Her voice cracked at the end. Shadow nickered softly, ears pricked at her tone. The vet addressed Henry. "There's saddle irritation and muscle strain, but nothing's broken. With rest." "Please," Lily cut in firmly. "If Shadow can stand, let us try once more. Mom would want that." Henry saw Emily's determination in his daughter's eyes. He nodded tearfully. "If it's safe, and Shadow's willing?" Isabel squeezed Henry's arm as Lily whispered to Shadow, Emily's message bridging past and present. Henry left the vet area, seeking fresh air. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as concerned murmurs drifted across the grounds. He raked his fingers through his gray hair, processing events. Joseph Miller approached with feigned sympathy. "Tough break about Shadow. Maybe some horses aren't meant to compete." Henry studied Joseph's smug expression, recalling recent suspicious incidents. "You're always around when things go wrong." "Just being neighborly," Joseph said, smile wavering. "Like when Shadow got sick, the broken fence, my daughter almost dying today." Joseph stepped back, eyes shifting. "Don't know what you mean. What did you do to that tack?" "Nothing that wouldn't have happened anyway," Joseph sneered. "You're weak. Emily saw it too." Henry slammed him against the wall. "Don't say her name. You sabotaged that equipment." "Prove it," Joseph challenged, fear showing. "You've got nothing." "I'm telling the officials and sheriff. We'll examine that tack." Joseph wrenched free and fled toward the parking lot. Henry returned to Lily and Shadow. It was Joseph. He tampered with the equipment. "That doesn't matter now," Lily said, stroking Shadow's neck. "What matters is getting better. Then we'll finish this competition, even if I ride bareback. We won't quit." Henry watched his daughter, seeing Emily's determination in her. Shadow nuzzled Lily's hand, and Henry knew they were unstoppable. Shadow struggled to his feet, while Lily stood close, whispering encouragement. The vet examined him and declared his vital signs stable, attributing the collapse to equipment issues rather than health concerns. After Henry questioned the diagnosis, the vet cleared Shadow to continue if he showed no distress. A senior official granted Lily another attempt due to the equipment tampering. Lily checked Shadow thoroughly while Isabel insisted on an hour's rest. Henry patrolled the arena, searching for the absent Joseph Miller. During the break, Shadow regained strength, constantly seeking Lily's presence. Using Emily's old rope halter from the tack room, Lily prepared for their second attempt. After a final veterinary check, Henry offered his daughter the chance to withdraw. She refused, embodying her mother's determination. The announcer informed the crowd about the equipment tampering and Lily's bareback attempt. As she mounted Shadow at the arena entrance, Isabel reminded her of Emily's wisdom about trust. Henry watched proudly as his daughter, channeling her mother's spirit, readied herself to compete. The judges huddled silently over their scorecards, while Lily sat on Shadow, her hand on his gleaming white coat. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the head judge, "in a display of extraordinary horsemanship, first place goes to Lily Walker and Shadow." The crowd roared. Lily wept against Shadow's neck, whispering, "We did it! Mom would be proud." Shadow nickered softly as Lily felt her mother's presence. Backstage, Henry embraced his tearful daughter as she dismounted. "You're just like her," he choked out, unable to finish. Isabel watched nearby, smiling through tears. The moment broke as security dragged out a struggling Joseph Miller. "You can't prove anything," he shouted. "Walker's always gotten everything." "It's over," Henry replied, arm around Lily. "We found your fingerprints on the damaged tack and feed." As Joseph was removed, Henry turned to Lily. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I was scared of losing you like your mother." "I understand now," Lily said, wiping his tear. "Mom's still with us in every ride." Henry pulled Lily close as Isabel joined them. Shadow touched his muzzle to Lily's shoulder, sharing in their moment of healing. Late summer sunlight bathed Walker Ranch in gold. Shadow grazed in the pasture, his white coat gleaming, his old eye scar faded like the family's past wounds. Henry and Lily sat on the porch steps with Emily's yellowed letters between them, her handwriting still crisp. "Listen, Dad," Lily said, unfolding one. "Horses, like people, carry hurts deep inside, but with patience and love, any heart can heal." She traced the words. "Mom knew what Shadow needed before we met him." Henry smiled softly. "Your mother saw into the heart of things." He picked up another letter. "Here she writes about your first pony ride at age 4. "Really?" Lily leaned in. "Says you told that pony all your secrets." Henry chuckled. "Some things never change." They sat quietly, papers rustling, as Shadow nickered from the field. "Watching you with Shadow lately," Henry said, "it's like seeing your mother's spirit in you." Lily's eyes teared, but she smiled. "I feel her beside me when I'm with him." Isabel brought out lemonade, completing their family circle. Henry and Lily walked to the barn where Shadow waited, ears forward, eyes gentle. The once frightened Stallion was now their trusted companion, having helped heal them all. In the evening air, Shadow stretched over the fence for a nuzzle. Lily stroked his forelock while Henry offered an apple, an act once impossible. They stood in the dusk, 3 people and 1 special horse, united by love and Emily Walker's lasting spirit. If you enjoyed the story of Shadow, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.